Welcome to this Ubuntu Project video facilitated by Zentertainment Enterprises. Be sure to like and subscribe if you learned something new. Now, onto the video.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Kevin Patterson, and today we're going to talk about building resilience and sustaining growth. This is a big piece of mental health, and it's a big piece of our holistic health because we can't always predict how life is going to go. And there are times when it's going great and we feel like we can recover and we can overcome anything because everything is going really well. And then something happens and we question everything. And in that moment where we question everything, our resiliency is put to the test because life isn't always easy. But we can learn how to build resiliency skills and tools that help us overcome whenever life does turn a little rough. So sit back, enjoy, and we're going to build some resiliency together in this module. First, let's talk about what is resilience. And resilience is the ability to recover from or basically bounce back from change or anything that we see as unfortunate that happens in our life. It's maintaining a positive attitude when things get tough, and it's rebounding anytime we have, adversity. So it's basically how do we cope with the ever-flowing changes of life, specifically the challenges in life. And so the science behind resilience is important because people that are really resilient, and I'm sure you've known people in your life that nothing can knock them down, or whenever things do knock them down, they get back up very quickly. And chances are they have some of these things going for them. Number one, their neuroplasticity in their brain is really strong. And so whenever we practice resiliency, and yes, it is a practice, you may deem yourself or label yourself as not being very resilient today, but with effort, you can become very resilient. And in doing so, this neuroplasticity in your brain is something that gets activated and we can work with it. And so it's basically our ability to learn something new. It's our ability to, see things in a new way. Or if something happens, we don't go into the old programming of, oh my gosh, doom and gloom, the sky is falling, but we can start to practice new ways of breathing or thinking or reformatting or setting new goals or learning from taking time. We can learn new ways that our brain starts to see that when things don't go our way, it's not the end of the world. It keeps our brain young, it keeps our brain moldable, and it helps us learn new ways to cope with stress. The second one is truly our stress response. And so this is our body's physiological reaction to a perceived threat. And so think about those, fight or flight, prehistoric, survival instincts that our ancestors had. It works to really keep us safe. And a good thing our body does it because we really do need that fight or flight response. The problem is a lot of people live in fight or flight and they don't realize that you can't sustain fight or flight always. There's hormones that get shot into our body that really work with our taking down our serotonin, increasing the stress hormones like cortisol. Our adrenal glands work overtime, and we just can't live like that. And so we have to teach our body how to be able to understand, is this a true threat? Am I just perceiving it as a threat, but it's not? Or am I truly in danger? And we need to reserve our stress responses for those times that it truly is stress. And we need to be able to teach ourselves that not everything is a life or death threat. The third thing is not only being able to understand what is truly a fight or flight, but then once we realize we need to come back down, it truly is the recovery and taking the time to process stress and to calm our body, come back into our body, and go back to where all of our systems are functioning in a proper homeostatic way. And so it's not that we can't feel things, it's just that we need to teach ourselves how to discern what truly is stress and what's not stress. And if it's not, how do I come back into my body? But if it is stress, how do I process through it and then come back to my body? And then fourth, people that are really strong at resilience, and it's a strength of theirs, chances are they really learn how to harness positive emotions. And here's what I mean is whenever things are not going well, it's really quick to paint a very bleak picture that, the sky is falling, like I said. But people who are great at resilience, they can feel that and say, oof, I don't like this sucks, or this feels bad in my body. But thinking this way is not going to, create a better outcome. And in fact, I need to go back to things like hope. What am I learning here? What can I anchor to that says, I've been through something that feels like this before and I've made it through. So I'm going to focus on gratitude. I'm going to focus on joy. I'm going to focus on hope because that helps me feel better in my body and I'm more likely to be open to navigating solutions. And so there really is science behind this that happens in our brain to say people that struggle with resilience, chances are they're still trying to, approach a stressful situation from old ways that they know don't work, but it's what they do. They're not recognizing that it might not be a fight or a flight, and they're catastrophizing everything, and it's causing lots of upheaval in their bodies. And they're not coming down very quickly; they're staying in it. And chances are, it's building up those negative emotions that make this feel overwhelming, or it's bigger than we are. And so you can kind of look at the two to say, if we've been in that former place before, let's see how we can start to come out of it to be here to where we can process our stress a little healthier. Another way of doing it is understanding that our mindset plays a big role in how adaptable we are or how resilient we are. And you may have seen this, but there is a thought process out there of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And as you read on the screen here, growth mindset is truly about staying open to the idea that everything that's adverse in our life can teach us new things. And we can develop skills that help us approach life in new ways, and that nothing is ever too big for us. We can always see it as a way to stretch and become better. And so this is where persistence comes from. This is where learning comes from. And whenever we see everything as a way to help us become better version of ourselves, we start to see resilience as a teacher and we start to see adversity as a teacher. However, if we're in that fixed mindset, this is the belief that this is just who we are. And I just suck at adversity. I suck at change. I can't go through change. And we don't see ourselves as being malleable and moldable. We see ourselves as having limitations that keep us stuck. And so again, we get to choose. Do you want to see yourself as this is just how it is and this is who I am? And we never get to evolve or become a more malleable version of ourselves? Or do you want to see yourself as everything is information and everything is for my growth and everything is teaching me how to be more evolved, more adaptable, and more resilient to change? So some things that make people resilient, and there are some ingredients that go into people who are great at change and great at being adaptable. What do they have in common? And here's some of the things that we've been able to see that most of them have positive relationships. They have people in their life that they can count on. They have strong connections and they feel like they're not alone. And so check in with that. Do you have positive relationships that whenever life feels tough, do you have people that you can go to that can remind you of your goodness, remind you of your strengths, and help you feel more hope and not hopeless? Or do you have the people in your life that when you stress out, they stress out with you and they kind of commiserate with you and it keeps you kind of stuck? Check on that. Next one is positive self-image and confidence. They see themselves as having what it takes to move through change. They believe in themselves and they know that nothing is too big for them. It might not be comfortable, but they have what it takes. It's that self-efficacy piece. And if we don't have that, then we see ourselves as not having what it takes to go through change. The third one is being adaptable, and it's being flexible and willing to, see that change happens. And sometimes we can predict the change and we can be okay with the change, but sometimes change, it isn't comfortable and it doesn't feel good, but we still know it's part of life and I can, flow with it. And I'll never forget when my youngest daughter was little, she was learning how to swim and she was terrified of the water. And she was only in 2 feet of water that all she had to do was stand up. But she had catastrophized herself that she was struggling and drowning and that people weren't there to help her. And a teacher that was in the water told her to do two things. And he said, choose. You can either just stand up or roll over on your back and just float. You're not struggling, either float or stand up. And that's how we teach ourselves to be adaptable, is seeing it's not a struggle. I can flow with it, I can float, and I can see where it takes me. I don't have to struggle. The fourth one is having problem-solving skills. And this is where we see adversity as a problem to be solved, and we stay into solution mode, and we see that we're willing to take feedback from other people. We're willing to see how are other people navigating these things. But when we're not in problem-solving mode, we just see this as like, I need to be rescued, or this is too big. I don't know what to do. And we just kind of like take our hands off the wheel. But people who are good at resilience are good at this problem-solving piece. The last one is having purpose and goals. And this is just a way to keep us in a forward moving direction, having motivation, having something to look forward to, and being aware of what our calling is in this world. And that's based on our strengths, it's based on our passions. And whenever people have these, they see themselves as being able to connect to something when they've lost that. And so putting these all together, this is kind of our recipe for what makes a resilient person. So maybe take a moment and check in with yourself. How are you doing in these areas? And if there's any that you need to maybe strengthen, let's set a goal around it. But if you're doing great in all of them, chances are you're probably pretty resilient. And so we can also look at the other side of this, maybe the darker side of it, to say what causes somebody to struggle with resilience and what causes somebody to not be resilient. And there are some things that are in our control and some things that are not in our control when you look at this list. And the first one is chronic stress, just living in a state where we're constantly exposing ourselves to stress, whether it's stress of people or environments or places that we need to spend our time. If it causes us chronic stress, chances are we're not going to feel very resilient. A lack of a support system. So just like what the opposite of the last slide said, if we don't feel like we have people that we can count on in our times of need, then it can feel like we don't have what it takes to overcome tough things. Negative thought patterns, if we just can't get out of that negative spiral. And it doesn't mean that you're a negative person wholly, but sometimes we just go right to the negative thinking about what else might be wrong or what could else go wrong. And sometimes we don't want to be right about finding out what that is. So we have to be able to stop ourselves in those negative spirals and come back into a positive one. But if we can't, then this is probably what's preventing us from being resilient. Now, here's where we get into things that we can't necessarily control, and it's traumatic experiences, things that were either done to us, whether it was in childhood or even in adulthood. If we were the victims of trauma, then that is something that we do need to have help with, and we do need to talk to somebody with, because chances are we need support in processing through it because more than likely we didn't deserve that. And it might be keeping us stuck in a place of not being able to exhibit resiliency. Poor self-esteem, how we view ourselves. If we view ourselves as, anything other than the magnificent people that we are, and we don't hold ourselves into high regard or higher reputations to live up to, chances are we might be our biggest saboteur when it comes to showing resilience. Inflexible thinking, if we're rigid and we can't be flexible and see that people might do it differently than we are, or maybe we don't have all the answers, maybe our way is not the best way, and we're not willing to go to a plan B or to be willing to hear feedback on how we can do things better, more better or different. Being rigid will keep us in a place where we can't adapt. Lack of problem solving skills. Like I said, if we just jump right into give me the answer, we never learn how to think for ourselves. We never learn how to problem solve through our bigger problems. And it leaves us open to needing to always be rescued. This is another one that we can't necessarily always control, physical health issues. If we have a condition or a diagnosis, or we're living with a circumstance that's outside of our control, it might limit what we can do. And we need to be compassionate with ourselves and be as resilient as we can, knowing we may not be able to improve our health. But if it is in our control and we're just choosing poor health decisions and we can control it, this is something that might be keeping us in a place of not being very resilient. Unresolved grief or loss. This goes back to even things like trauma, but things that if we have grief and loss because something or someone was taken from us or are no longer in our life, not being able to process that keeps us stuck. And it might not make us be able to process big loss in our life, even though cognitively we know that people die and life ends and our life will end. And so it's like we know that, but we can't feel that and we can't move through it because something is keeping us stuck. And so maybe talking to somebody about how to heal and move through a bereaved time in your life, it might help unlock some resilience in you that might be stuck. And then finally, just overwhelming responsibility. Sometimes when we overwhelm and overburden and overextend ourselves, we end up saying yes when we want to say no, or sometimes we say no when we want to say yes. And we end up taking on lots of responsibilities because maybe we don't set good boundaries. Another one is maybe we just do have a lot of responsibility and we're not asking for help. And we only have a small emotional capacity. And when it's gone, everything just feels like it's on fire. And if that's the case, that might be keeping us from our resiliency. So think of this and look at this and see in moments of your life that you might be able to look back and say, I didn't feel very resilient in that moment. Which one or two or combination of these things do you think was playing into your inability to be as resilient as you want to be? So maybe just something to consider. But if this feels like, yes, I see this and I do agree with it, but I'm moving through it, awesome. Chances are you're looking more like the former slide of what it takes to be a resilient person. But if you're questioning, this slide might help you diagnose where you're struggling with resiliency. And so I wanted to share with you um, some journaling questions and some things that you might want to consider just to show yourself that you probably are doing better with resiliency than you think you are. You might just be being hard on yourself. And so, a few questions that you can ask yourself is number one, describe a time that you overcame a significant challenge and what did you learn about yourself? Sometimes we need to go back and say, wow, I was really pretty awesome here. And I really did a great job of overcoming something that most people wouldn't. And we need to give ourselves credit. Another question is what strengths helped you through this time? And when you look at tough times, you can also say like this is what helps me get through tough times. For example, I'm actually very patient. I have a very long fuse, and I think it's probably being a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher in my life that it's taught me patience. I wasn't always born with patience and didn't always exhibit it, but in times of not being resilient, this is something that I can anchor to and say, I actually have a lot of patience to sit with tough things and not have to be urgent or not have to panic. I know how to calm myself down, and that helps me get through tough times. So, what strengths do you have? The third one is what motivates you when facing difficulties. Sometimes we are subject to people motivating us in ways that they think are motivating, but they're not truly motivating to us. And so it might not feel like support. And so we need to reacquaint ourselves with what does motivate you when you're feeling difficulties. And maybe we can articulate those to the people in our life so that they show us support in ways that truly does feel like support. Other questions are what strategies work best for you in managing stress, thinking through what works for you. Does going outside and just getting some sun and some fresh air work for you? Does powering through it and just getting the big things done first work for you? Does going to grab a snack or take a nap, does that help for you? But start to check in and say, how do you manage your stress and what strategies work? Another question is to talk about a time where a failure led to a success and what did you learn? Because sometimes what feels like a failure up front actually prevents us from something that we might not truly want. And it feels like a failure, but in hindsight, we look at that and say, whew, I'm really glad that didn't happen. And that's actually a bigger success. And I learned a lot about myself and how I work through failure. So think about a time and you can see that when things go well, here's what your strengths are. And when things don't go well, you still demonstrate strengths that help you see failure as a success sometimes. And then finally, how do you balance accepting what you can't change and what you can change? And so sometimes we stress and obsess about things that are not in our control. And this might be direct, but stop doing that. Because if you can't control it and it's out of your control, we don't need to spend our time there. And I know that that's easier said than done, but see if you can catch yourself the next time that you're really worrying and stressing and overthinking and obsessing about something to stop and say, can I control this? And if I can, do it. And if I can't, stop doing that because you're wasting your time and your energy when you could be focusing on something that is within your control. And so, again, said with love, stay in your lane and control what you can control. You'll free up time and you'll stop overburdening yourself and watering yourself down, trying to be everything to everyone when you stay focused on what you can change. So, a few things on how to develop a long term resilience plan. Number one, playing to your strengths is a big one. There's a book out there called Strengths Based Leadership, and it really does focus on a management style. So they use it in leadership in the organization, but you can apply it to your life personally too. To say, if I'm holding myself hostage by my biggest weaknesses, chances are I'm not good at it, I don't like it, or I would be doing great at it. And so I can't punish myself for having weaknesses. Instead, what I can do is say, I'm really good at these things, and these are my strengths. And if I amplify and magnify them, chances are I can lead through my strength and really show ways that I can be resilient. And so assessing personal strengths and vulnerabilities is a great way to say, Am I punishing myself unfairly? And am I also leading with my strengths? Goal setting. You can also set goals around, those like 5 things we talked about that make a resilient person truly resilient. Set a goal around one of those. If you need to increase your support network, maybe, spend some time setting a goal of building a support network. That might be a great place to start, but it's a way where you can intentionally build resilience. And then the third one is a regular review and adaptation of your goals, and just revisiting goals and figuring out what in your life has changed and how do I have to edit my goals to match that might be a great way to see how our goals change over time to meet the needs. And that's actually teaching us to be more adaptable. And then ways to overcome some obstacles to resilience. So as you practice more resiliency, here's some things to keep in mind that might try and sabotage you, but we're smarter than that. We can stay in the driver's seat here. And number one, it's just acknowledging that we all have a fear of failure. And so having a fear of failure sometimes prevents us from taking risks because we don't want to fall on our face, or we don't want to have to make mistakes. But coming through with a growth mindset is a great way to practice that it's okay to make mistakes, because we can still learn from it and we can still integrate those lessons into, having more emotional intelligence moving forward, and emotional agility moving forward. The second one is perfectionism, and this one just runs rampant in our culture, especially in the Western world, because we have a lot of input in our media and in our society and the way that we compare ourselves to each other on social media, that we really hold ourselves to these perfectionist standard. And frankly, no one can meet those. And so this can hinder our process. And instead, we need to look at, how am I making progress, and how am I not going for perfection, because I can't sustain perfection. Specifically, I can't sustain perfection if it's somebody else's measuring stick that I'm using. So I can't even compare myself to someone else because that's not me. And so we need to make sure that we're giving ourselves the space to make mistakes as long as we're learning from them. So let's really start to get the perfectionist bug out of our system. And then the third thing of a way to overcome any obstacles to resilience is to practice acceptance. And so we have to accept that sometimes we're going to get it right and sometimes we're not going to get it right. And so whenever we experience setbacks and obstacles that are normal, we need to be able to adapt and go back to the drawing board to say, how do I make a new strategy or set a new goal that helps me get back on the path and put one foot back in front of the other? However, whenever we can't accept that we've made mistakes or that setbacks happen, or we spend too long dwelling on it, we start to lose our momentum. And so these are just a few ways that you can plan for obstacles, because they happen, but know that when you see them, we're going to move through them. And so, as I mentioned in previous modules, there are some resources that I'm offering that I want to make sure that you tap into and use to maximize your life here. And one of them is an ebook that I wrote about practicing mindfulness. And this is a great way to stay present and to be here now, specifically whenever you're practicing resiliency, because we tend to start to worry about the future or start to really agonize and dwell on the past, that we forget that we're here now. And so this book gives you some very tangible strategies for how to practice mindfulness in your everyday life. So I hope you download that. I hope you find value in it, and I hope it helps you become the best version of yourself possible. So as always, I love sharing this space with you, and thank you for listening.
Please be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell to know when we upload a new video.